All right, there we go. In the interest of not wasting anyone's time, we'll get going and start our conversation. And people can roll in as we get going. So, thank you all for joining today's Risk Radar on confronting data security in the age of AI. I am Nikki Hughes, Marketing Communications Director at FBinsure, and will be helping to moderate today's presentation. Please use the Q&A feature in the menu bar down at the bottom of today's webinar for any questions you may have during our session. We'll do our best to address those at the conclusion of each section so that we don't get too far along, but anytime you have a question, just throw it in there and we will loop back around to it. Without too much further ado, I'm excited to introduce our first speaker, Tom Rogers. He is the CEO here at FBinsure. He brings over 2 decades of experience in the insurance industry and is known for his strategic approach to risk management and a commitment to kind of reshaping how businesses view insurance. He's led the development of the FB Comp Advisors and Risk Advisors program here at FBinsure to more directly support business owners in better controlling their risks, and knows, as most of us on today's call do, that a focus on the future of risk is really critical in today's business environment. So without too much more, Tom, I'll let you take over.
Thanks, Nikki. I'm looking at the long title for today's session of FB Risk Radar, Confronting Data Security Risks in the Age of AI, and thinking back to how we kind of got here. Years ago, we were doing on-site seminars quite often, and to try and bring people together to discuss important topics like this. And I think if you just carved out a piece of this confronting data security risks, we've probably done this session as a seminar or webinar. I can't tell you how many times over the years. But I can't help but think about, the part in the age of AI and how much that's changed and how rapidly that's changed, just very recently. I think we all sort of saw this coming a few years ago, and we're a little bit more in tune with it 2 years ago. And in the last year, it just feels like we've been smacked upside the head with AI. You know, for something like this, I would go to the Wall Street Journal in the morning and just look for, headlines, right? And it used to be I could look for headlines and see data breach, data breach, data breach, cyber attack. You're not seeing a lot of that anymore because it's not necessarily news anymore. But I went this morning and just to count the amount of times I saw AI in headlines, um, I stopped counting. There was so much of it. It didn't make any sense to continue on. So things have definitely changed. So here we are in our webinar format, and we've changed the way we do these. These are meant to be a little bit more bite-sized, informational for everybody, who's really busy today and maybe doesn't have 2 or 3 hours to have breakfast and sit in a seminar, but is willing to spend 45 minutes with us on a really, really important topic. And there's not many more important topics, as complex as data risk, cybersecurity, AI today. Um, we were just having a chat before we got started, and talking about how prevalent it really is, and how it's become more and more prevalent. And we didn't, I think years ago we thought it was incredibly prevalent. It was here, it was in your face. And to look back on the last 3 years and to think of where we were and where we are now, how much more important this is. Um, I think back to 25 years ago when I started in this business, data security, cyber security, it wasn't talked about all that much. And it was definitely talked about in a nice to have context, as it relates to insurance and risk management. And where today, this is non-optional behavior. We have to be spending time in these areas to protect our businesses and protect ourselves. Um, and why is that? Well, the threats are increasing every day. And AI is going to be a big part of why we're seeing more and more threats than we ever have before. And I know Mike is going to dive into that today. Um, but our digital footprints are bigger, right? We're doing a lot more with technology than we ever have been. We are more vulnerable than we ever have been. And I think we've always thought about this as the vulnerability really exists in larger companies, but nearly half of all cyber attacks are happening in companies with less than 1,000 employees. If you looked around, if we could see everybody on this Zoom right now, I would say look around because half the people have already experienced a cyber attack. And that's scary stuff. And it gets really scary when you start to understand, depending upon the magnitude of the cyber attack, the potential of reopening your doors after a cyber attack goes down dramatically. And there's lots of small businesses, and you don't hear this because they're not headlines in the Wall Street Journal. They're not reported to the regulatory authorities that everybody's supposed to be reporting to when there's a cyber attack. You don't hear about it, but businesses are closing their doors because they've been attacked. And it's not just an insurance problem, it's a risk problem, it's a reputation problem, it's a problem of getting your clients or your customers to come back and trust in you as an organization. So major challenges that just aren't an IT headache any longer. They're far more than that. So today, we are honored to have Mike Meyer from our national partner, Patriot Growth Insurance Services, to help us navigate the many threat vectors that we need to address. I just really wanted to say threat vectors, Mike. Um, Mike he's in the role of AVP of IT Operations and Security in our company. He's been doing this for over 2 decades. I've known Mike for the last 5 years, and I am glad that he's on our side. Mike is a self-proclaimed geek, IT geek, who has even he's gotten the nickname Papa Bear for putting a nice warm hug layer of protection around us in our organization, and we greatly appreciate that. And it's only IT geeks that you get to use the words threat vectors. I don't get to say that every day. So um, we appreciate Mike's time today. He has deep expertise in, not only preventing cyber attacks, but, and that's the prevention side of this when you think about risk management. But Mike's there for some of our clients, for agencies within our organization, and knows how to handle incident response when you have a crisis situation. So we're honored to have him here today. I think he's going to be wonderful for all of you. We're all going to learn something here today. I'm looking forward to it. And with that, I'll turn it over to Papa Bear.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Tom.
Nice.
And you spoke to it so well. I love the passion that you have around this, and specifically what is in the news and what's not. The number of cyber attacks is increasing dramatically. We see an ongoing trend of this over the last several years. That's the projection going forward. You're right, most of these don't get a lot of visibility or the fanfare that they used to because it's just such a common occurrence, especially in the smaller organizations. We don't see it. I was at a talk recently and they said if you are part of that 50% that believes you haven't been, you probably just haven't found it yet, because they're believing that that's a higher than 50% number, that we just don't have the maturity in some of these organizations to even identify that they've been compromised. We're going to talk through several things today. In that you guys have had some of this conversation before. Some of this will look a little bit familiar. I'm going to talk a little bit about how cyber criminals or threat actors acting today look a little bit different than how they used to look even a couple years ago. I will talk about some of the common threats that they utilize and what we can do about those threats a little bit throughout this presentation. Today's technology is the big focus. So you'll notice me sprinkle a few things through on how these threats are being realized or further enabled by technology today. And really coming back to one, how can we use that same technology to defend ourselves, and how can we protect ourselves as well? We'll end with some tips and tricks that, again, some of those are going to look and feel pretty familiar. There may be some new ones on there, and I have a couple that are near and dear to my heart that I'll share with you as well. Tom and the team did such a good job with the intro. I'm not going to share anything about myself. They highlighted it very well. I will add to the Papa Bear component that it's not just here at work. I do that in my home life. And that's one of the reasons that security really stood out to me, as it gives me an opportunity to do that here and kind of cross my love and passion for IT with security. So it's been a very fun journey. As Tom kind of spoke to, fun is relative when it comes to cybersecurity. It's always bad news when it comes to cyber, and it's so difficult to keep up with because it's evolving so quickly. What many people look at is what we did 5 years ago, 10 years ago, as still being really appropriate and active in how we would protect ourselves today. And some of that's true and some of it's not. For me, it comes back to starting with understanding how these threat actors operate, the types of tactics that they use, so that we can be more diligent against those. So let's start there. I'm curious, and if the folks on can use the chat function, when we say cyber criminal or threat actor, what are the first things that come to mind? My
Sorry, Mike,
favorite
I
name.
actually think the chat feature is disabled on this
Oh, okay.
one.
Oh, okay, perfect. Is there a way to give feedback, Nikki?
They could probably submit through the question and answer section if they've got anything, and I can
Okay.
just mark it as a question that we've answered.
All right. If you have anything major, if we get anything, please share. Because I can't see it on the screen, unfortunately. My favorite answer to this is like the 1990s movie version of the hacker, where they're, in the dark room with the hoodie on, and the dark screen is reflecting across their face. It's just not what we see this day and age. We do have some individuals operating as threat actors. That is still something that we do see, and we'll talk about a little bit. But more commonly, we see these groups coming together and operating kind of as an organization. It's a multi-pronged approach at attacking and building data against you to get better at these attacks. All of the things that you think are true about those cyber criminals and what comes to mind probably are some still true, but it has evolved, especially in the past couple years. We have groups, they come up with funny names, but some like Scattered Spider, APT31, Lockbit, and others have specific things that they're known for. But I unfortunately could take the rest of the hour just listing out the name of some of these groups and talking about how they operate. The point of this, though, is they don't operate as a single entity. They're not looking for just one attack. Many times what they're looking through an initial attack is to, with minimal effort, get as much data about you or your organization as they can to then bring in-house and build more and more information about you to do a more targeted attack down the road. Most of the attacks that we see that are larger scale are not singular attacks. There's some pre-component to that where something else has been compromised and later used in a larger scale attack. I'm going to switch to the next slide and give a little bit of an example of that. And I'm going to pick on Nikki as I give this example. Where I'm going to start on step one is that I have no information about Nikki, but I am a threat actor, and I'm going to try to target Nikki and get her to click on the thing or get some data from her. And where we're going to end up with step 5 is I don't even really need Nikki as part of it. For step 1, if I knew nothing about Nikki, but I wanted to target her, I'd probably send something to her that I hoped she would click on. And I'm sure everybody here has seen those, you have your mineral rights in Oklahoma or some inheritance that you're due, something with a sense of urgency that just has nothing to do with you. Those are pretty easy to identify. And for the most part, that's what we have historically seen. That's what we train around most commonly. It's what most people, again, can pretty easily identify this day and age. Unfortunately, it's one of the least common things that we see, other than it's common that these things get sent out through automation. But if Nikki were to receive that, I have pretty high confidence she's going to go, nope, that's garbage. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that. Now, if I just looked at LinkedIn for Nikki, well, now I have this whole world of information I can use against her. So I know what her role is. I know where she works. I know some of her coworkers. I might even have contact information that's better than a Yahoo address or some public email address I have for her. But I could send her a note that's much more targeted by simply just looking at one piece of data. I can say, hey, Nikki, there's a marketing issue with this one thing that was released by FBinsure. I believe that these lawyers are looking at it from this organization. We never deal with this, but we need to get on it immediately. Here, I put the summary of this at this link. Go ahead and click the link and it'll take you to that summary. Nikki might catch it, especially if she doesn't know me, but that's much more likely to succeed than the first option. Now, if you add in additional data that's just publicly available, like off of social media, pictures, hobbies, friends and family, anything that potentially could be posted across any social media platform, well, now I've got even more ammunition to go back to Nikki on. That if Nikki had I don't know if you have a sister or not, Nikki, but if Nikki had a sister, I could say, I'm Jill's coworker, and I see that you play this game. Hey, I play that game too. Hey, do you want to swap notes on it? Here, I have some of my thoughts on this link, or whatever it is that that happens to look like a commonality. Where it gets tricky from here, from step 3 to step 4, is that data enrichment portion. And this is what those threat actor groups do. Is if I had Nikki's date of birth, if I had her social security number, if I knew where she lived in her past 3 residences, if I had this fountain of information about her, I don't even really need to go to Nikki. I don't have to send her a phishing attempt or try to compromise her anymore. I can go directly to her accounts. If I knew where Nikki banked, for example, I could go and look at their security questions to say, okay, can I answer any of these? I know what her dog's name is. Let's go answer, a couple of these questions, see if I can find a way into her account. Impersonation is that last step, and that's where it gets really difficult. This is where we're seeing a lot of traction, especially in the last 12 months. Groups like Scattered Spider are very, very talented at impersonation. Impersonation can be things like spoofing, so pretending to be an email address or a person that they're not. The deep fake, whether it's video or audio, has gotten really, really popular. And I use my wild card finish with ishing because there's all kinds of ishing. Phishing is where it started, and that's the general category. But there's vishing, smishing. If you can come up with a version of it, there's probably something that it's tied to, of all different ways of trying to use that information to get more. And if I had a couple of videos from social media or anything of Nikki, if I called her and had her leave me voicemails and use that voice to do a deep fake of her audio of her voice, unfortunately, these are things that are being done and are being utilized now. Now, while all of this progresses and the threat gets more serious, the takeaway from this is let's keep them at step one. Let's try to limit what we give them to even be able to target us. And much of what I'll talk about later in this presentation on how to protect yourself, how to keep yourself closer to step one, are highlighted at just that, of trying to find ways of not putting things on social media, or what you put on there, having it be controlled in a way where you feel comfortable, if somebody were to have access to it, would not compromise you further. In other words, stop digging the hole. If you already have a bunch of data out there, really I would take a look at that and challenge that against like your security questions, or in the eyes or arms of a threat actor, how could that data be used against you? This is something that we very commonly talk about. And again, with these emerging groups, what they're really focusing on, this is one of the best ways to stop them. Let me pause there because I gave a bit of example and a couple thoughts. But before I move to the next section, Nikki, do we have any questions, or if folks have questions, please go ahead and submit them now. Oh, you're still on mute, Nikki, but I think that was a no, we haven't gotten anything.
Sorry, yep, that is correct. No questions yet. And I have figured out how to enable our chat feature so that if you do have more that you would like people to put in the chat, that should be available now.
Much appreciated. Thank you, Nikki. And yeah, as we go, folks, if you do have questions, please drop those in chat. I'll pause periodically as we go, and please, happy to answer any questions that you do have. All right, now that we've talked a little bit about the threat actors, I'd like to talk about what they do. What we used to see, again, more with individuals doing this than groups doing this, is that smash and grab. They get in, they get access, they try to get information from you, or they send out a bunch of emails on your behalf, and then they get out of the system or they get kicked out. And while that still does happen, majority of what we see is that perpetuation of gathering data to be used later, or they sit dormant for a long period of time and just steal small bits of information or supplant themselves in a way where they can be used later in a larger attack. Whether it's data gathering, that smash and grab, or longer data trickling, we call it. If there's extortion that's tied with this, like a ransom event, ransomware, et cetera, their motives, you're probably not going to know fairly early. But the way they go about it, we can look at and try to stop as best we can. I keep joking on the ishing techniques, and here are a few of them. Bulk phishing, or what we call net phishing, is casting out as much as you can with no particular target, hoping that you get a few bites along the way. Spear phishing and whaling are really targeted attacks, either at executives or non-executives. Phishing is voice, smishing is text or SMS phishing. There's email phishing. Again, the list goes on. We could spend quite a while just going through the different ishing. But really, these come down to trying to get somebody to do something that they probably shouldn't do, or putting them in a compromised position in a way where they're more likely to do something that I want them to do. The most common types, I'll just go through quickly. Business email compromise is the most common type, in the 90th percentile, the most common type of compromise. If they get access to an email account, particularly a business email account, they'll have all that data within that email account. They can send more messages on your behalf and compromise others. Many times they can get into other data stores and other things through your email. Email is the highest success and dramatically the most common version of threat that we see. Personnel compromise would be the next. Having somebody's personal account get compromised and have that filter in or spill over into their work account. Impersonations we've talked about a bit. We'll talk about a bit more here in a little bit. Malicious software or malware, whether it's ransomware or it has an individual malicious intent, has been a thing for some time. I would say less malware and more ransomware has been the trend that we've seen. These threat actor groups, as they come together as an organization, a small payout is great, and getting data is part of their purpose. But they're really looking at those large payouts where they don't actually have to do anything with that data, that you're paying them to get that data back. The worst part about all of these tactics is that, 5-10 years ago, these threat actor groups would have to develop on their own. And if they wanted to perpetuate a threat, they'd have to build that malware or the campaign that gets sent out through email. These days, all of this and more is offered as a service. So I can go out on either the dark web or internet and purchase malware to use for my intent, or purchase addresses for email campaigns. Or if you can think of it related to a threat, you can pretty well purchase it and have it done through automation same day these days. I wanted to give a couple real world examples on the types of threats we've seen be successful in the industry. These don't necessarily relate to Patriot directly or FBinsure directly, but just around the insurance industry, both of these are real world examples. One's more of a traditional example on what we'd see, but a little bit of a spin on it, and the other one's sort of a newer version of that example. So first one I'm going to pick on poor Bob. Bob received an urgent email saying, oh, you have this invoice to pay, it's past due, it's got to be paid immediately. And the tricky part of this one is it's from somebody Bob works with constantly. So he knows the email address, he knows the person's language, and it looks pretty legitimate. Good email address, similar type of language is what he'd expect. But he's not expecting an invoice. So he emails this person back, we'll call them Jim. He emails Jim back and says, Jim, I'm not aware of an invoice. Is this real? And unfortunately for Jim, the threat actor already had access to, or unfortunately for both of them, the threat actor already had access to Jim's email. So the threat actor sees that email comes in and says, yeah, totally legit. Please go ahead and send the invoice. And they interacted in a way that compromised their financial information and ultimately ended up compromising Bob's credentials and all of the data he has access to. So Bob started with a good thought of taking a step back and saying, oh, this doesn't feel right to me. Unfortunately, the action that he took left him in a compromised state. What would have been better is if Bob had picked up the phone and called Jim and said, hey, did you just email me this thing? Because he probably has a better chance of recognizing him over the phone and confirming, or having some type of dialogue in the email back and forth other than just a yes, it's okay. Like, hey, Jim, I know your dog was sick. Are they okay now? How was that conference that you went to? Something like that, just to verify 100% that it really is Jim on that side. Now, obviously, it's not realistic to do that in every email that you get every day and every interaction that you have of having safe words built into every conversation. But when there's a sense of urgency to it, when something doesn't feel right, my number one recommendation is trust but verify. Always take that extra step to verify who you're talking to, that it's correct before you provide any information or click on any link. You've probably heard stories like that one before. This one might be a little bit different. So Mary gets a call from her sister who is super excited. There's this urgent giveaway that the radio station's hosting. She wants to win this cruise and she wants as many people to sign up for it as possible. So Mary's sister calls her and says, I'm going to send you a link. I need you to click on the link. Just put in your information. We're going to get a cruise. And shortly after the call, which was brief, Mary gets a text from her sister's phone number with a link to that cruise. I know many people, myself probably included a couple of years ago, would click on the link and fill it out and hope that we won a cruise for my sister. In this case, neither were correct. Mary's sister was deep-faked. They could spoof that phone number because her personal accounts were compromised. They were able to call from that phone number to Mary and text from that phone number to Mary, all acting like her sister. The link, of course, was malicious. All the information that they got led to a compromise of data. I unfortunately could easily spend the rest of this time as well giving other examples and fun scenarios that are good to learn from. But I think these examples also show kind of that traditional method that we've seen of email compromise with a new spin on it of that threat actor still having access to the compromised person's email. And then Mary's sister, obviously, through the deep fake and the fake video, or excuse me, fake audio and perpetuation, how that threat has grown, and even in traditional threats, how they've found new ways to get more juice out of these threats, so to speak.
Mike, can I jump in for a second?
Absolutely.
And I don't want to steal any of your thunder because you may address this later, but these are both great examples of what I would say would be the weakest point of our entire data security infrastructure. If you want to know where the weakest points are, you look in the mirror because it's us. It's us as individuals that are, unfortunately, even if they're well intentioned, sometimes we're making bad decisions. And these are real life scenarios. You hear them, you almost think they're somewhat tongue in cheek or made up, but I mean, this stuff is happening every single day. And I think from an action item standpoint, coming out of this discussion, it really, underscores the need to make sure we're providing training for our people. And that's where I may be jumping all over Mike's thunder later. But, I think it's incredibly important for us to recognize that as, organization leaders, and make sure that we have focus on how we're addressing these issues because insurance policies alone are not enough any longer. I mean, a lot of effort needs to be put in to protecting yourself, and it's not a one-time situation. It requires ongoing training, and education for all of our teams. So I'll
Yeah, no, very well put, Tom. And you're definitely reading my notes because we definitely will talk about some tips later about some of these items. And I see the one question in chat. I will finish this presentation with some things to do, both best practice and my personal recommendations, both personally and things that your organization, any organization, should be looking at as well. So I promise I will come back both for personal and family protection. I didn't mean to scare you first and then come back with the good news, but I promise we're getting to the good part of this as well. All right. So in talking through some of the examples, it's good to kind of zoom out and look at the overall landscape of threat that we have. Um, As the number of threats increase, Tom mentioned at the top of the call, the dollar signs associated with these for each organization and then collectively across the United States, across the world, keeps just going up astronomically. And even the projections that they keep increasing year over year are shy because it just becomes such a thing that compounds that we don't fully understand the way it's going to evolve. Unfortunately, it's moving in the wrong direction. It's growing instead of getting less. And Tom, you nailed it. It's day by day, hour by hour, second by second, we see these threats. For even within my organization, the number of emails that we let through is about 6% of the overall email volume that we get of random threats and activities that go on that we block systemically. And again, all this is happening through automation. It's very easy to set up a bot that sends out thousands and thousands of messages until it's taken down. And then I just set up another one and another one and another one. And it's not just one group doing this. Hundreds or thousands of these groups are doing these worldwide. It leads to a lot of junk. Layering the best tools is the best, easiest thing that we can do to help with that, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But Tom, and you nailed it. The human component to it has to be that last layer of defense, and that's where education, these things come in. Now, with today's threat landscape, which we talked about a little bit, they're becoming much more difficult to identify. These messages are carefully crafted. They've used AI and these large language models to not have it be in broken English or read in an odd way. It looks and reads very, very well. I could even put in there, tailor this message for an insurance organization, and it will do so on my behalf. I don't have to think about it, much less craft the message. The majority are highly targeted, and they still are trying to introduce that sense of urgency. If you ever get an email or any type of notification that seems out of the blue and gives you that sense of urgency, it's a great idea to take a breath and slow down and make sure it's something that is real before you act. This infographic is very compelling to some of the things I just mentioned, and it shows that increase of estimated damage costs. And this is what we know. This doesn't include what's not reported or what we don't know, and how it's looked and how it's projected to look in the near future. And you could look at the numbers and it speaks for itself. What I like is the info portion on the bottom right side of between that 10-year span and between 21 and 2031, the ransomware occurrence is going to go from every 11 seconds down to every 2. And while that's a huge increase, we're talking every 11 seconds is ridiculous. And how often these types of threats, ransomware used to be kind of the pinnacle of threat. If you've gotten a ransomware event, you're really in the thick of it. And now it's become so common, every 11 seconds, it's actually down somewhere between 3 and 5 seconds today on the level of occurrence and commonality of these things. And again, this is what we know, not what's not reported, not for some of these organizations that aren't mature enough to handle an event like this and unfortunately end up shutting their doors as a result. I'm going to talk about a couple pieces of technology. I'm going to spend a fair amount of time here as this was kind of that main focus. And we've talked about some of these pieces intertwined with the things that we've talked about and highlighted so far. This is where the rubber starts to meet the road. And the next part is what we can do about it. The biggest 2 pieces of technology, Tom mentioned it at the top, and he's 100% correct. You can't take 2 steps anywhere these days without hearing AI mentioned, and it's 100% the truth. AI is the biggest driving force behind the evolution of these threats and where things are headed. AI is such a general name for how technology is being used. I like splitting it up into 2 or 3 different groups. So the first one I'm going to talk about is automations. The automations that are in place, these are a lot of things where it takes a little bit of interaction to do a lot of work. So what I talked about with the net phishing, where I can set up things that will send a lot of messages on my behalf, that's automation, net phishing. The CAPTCHA requirements, so when you go to log into a site and it says how many bicycles are on the page, automation and AI has gotten very, very good at cracking those. CAPTCHA is actually kind of a thing of the past these days because of what character recognition and object recognition has gotten to through AI. There are several overlays that can easily bypass those these days. And something we used to see more in 90s, kind of early 2000s, and now is making a resurgence is brute force attacks or denial of service attacks. It's where you send a lot of attacks into a single entity trying to get through it. It's probably going to be unsuccessful, but if the effort is so low and I can do it through automation, why not try? I can at least knock at the door. You know, I have one of the engineers on my team shares this quote commonly, and I love using it and as often as I can. You can have your data in the best built, most secure castle with a moat and a drawbridge and a dragon and all these protections in front of you. But if you leave the drawbridge down and you give the dragon a break, it doesn't really matter. The best protections are only as good as our ability to use those and stay protected behind them. If we give people access, give them our passwords, if they're able to gain access to our accounts, it's getting them past those defenses. And this is, again, where Tom mentioned that human component, that employee component is so important. And it comes back to education and awareness for those things. Artificial intelligence makes it all even more tricky. Again, the large language models and ChatGPT is the biggest example of this, is leading to better crafted messages, better social engineering by these threat actor groups. The deep fake we've talked about a couple times, those videos and voice cloning is a thing today that's being used broadly. It's unfortunately not one of these things that we go, oh, it's kind of coming. It is very much here. And in the past 12 months has been used more than we'd like. The ability to target effectively and use data to build those targets. And I don't have to look and go, oh, Tom's got a pretty good title. I'm gonna whale Tom. I'm gonna go after Tom is one thing. But if I have that fountain of information, that step 5 of information about Nikki, maybe Nikki's an easier target. And from Nikki, I can get to Tom much more easily. Unfortunately, the threat actors have gotten really good at conversations like that, building data repositories like that, and becoming very strategic. The part that worries me the most is what we call adaptive malware. There's several types of artificial intelligence. One is more input based, where I have to give artificial intelligence a prompt and it will return data back to me. That's what's most commonly out. ChatGPT and others, that's what they are commonly using. Agentic AI is the next version of artificial intelligence. This is where it reasons and takes action on its own. And this isn't a thing of the future. It is happening today. It's not as broadly spread as the traditional version of AI. Malware is using the same type of technology. So you can put a piece of software into an organization, and once it's in the organization, it can determine what type of organization it's in, what level of access it has, where it sits. And it will evolve itself to run only certain scripts or to seek certain information based upon what it learns once it's in the environment. If it gets blocked on its way out, it can logic its way through different ways of trying to get that information back out to a threat actor. Good news is the defenses are just as using the same technology and trying to be just as smart. Where we have layered defenses now and people would try to find ways of weaving in between those layers, we now have better versions of adaptive protection that can identify that type of traffic and either eliminate it or flag it accordingly. Let me pause here. Hopefully I haven't scared everybody off the, the webinar just yet, but I'm so anxious to get into the what do we do about it and share a little bit there. But let me pause. I don't see any other questions. For now, I'm gonna hold for about 30 seconds. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop those into the Q&A. Okay. I don't see anything yet. Once we get through the what can we do about it, I'll come back to that just to see if there's anything else. And if you have multitasked up to this point, I would say pay attention for the next couple slides. I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of tomorrow's threat landscape, and then really what can we do now and what are we going to be doing getting ahead of these things. I talked a little bit about the agentic piece. The other side of what we're seeing through technology is automation, these automated assistants and how you can train models to respond to emails and talk on the phone in your voice are amazing. And I wish I could send a few of my calls to those things so they could take the calls for me. It's going to increasingly become a thing over the next couple years. These automated personas, automated assistants, whether it's on social media or part of work or however you're using them, are another threat vector, Tom's favorite word of the day, that we have to understand and protect around. The more something can use my voice, the more everybody I know is potentially compromised if I become compromised. And the same is going to be applied to anybody who uses one of these that could potentially be used. We talked a little bit about agentic AI on adaptive malware. I won't circle back to that. If you've heard of quantum computing and what they call post-quantum cryptography, quantum computing is an incredibly powerful version of computing in comparison to what we have as capability now. So the processing capability of how fast data can be processed now versus with quantum computing, it's kind of looking at reading a book versus a current processor. These quantum processors work so fast, in fact, that the level of encryption that is on pretty much everyone's data with today's level of processing power would take years and like hundreds of years to break through that level of cipher. With quantum computing, it's a matter of seconds, even sub-seconds. So quantum computing is going to dramatically change how encryption works, how we store data, how we protect data, and this is something probably in the next 5 years will be a thing. All of the things that we'll talk about and what to do are still going to be important, but I think it's important to look that not just of doing where we are today and saying, okay, I hit that hurdle, I'm good here going forward. Now, this is an evolving threat landscape, and where we are is just on the doorstep of some pieces that are really concerning for how we're going to keep our data safe. I mentioned again, it's not all bad. There are some good things too, that quantum computing is also going to enable our defenses. Some of the processing limitations we have now and the logs we get when people try to infiltrate our systems are so high in volume. They're so difficult to read that even using our technology, it takes time to parse those logs and go through those. With quantum computing, we can go through it in seconds and have a good disposition on what's actually happening much faster than we have now. In addition to automations and other things we can put in from a defense landscape. One of the answers is, some of you may have heard the zero trust approach to data security, of instead of allowing access to everything and limiting what we know is bad, they allow access to nothing and only allow access to the things that we know are good. And I think we're going to see even more than we have in the industry and across the world, more of a shift to that zero trust methodology. Now, in the meantime, what's important is what you can do to protect yourself. And the first thing I recommend for any organization, but really any person to get some familiarity with, is find some version of a framework that you like that's an industry standard. Try to understand it as best you can and get as mature as you can with it, because those frameworks are the best source of truth that you can start with. One that I like is CIS. That's the Center for Internet Security. If it remains funded, we'll see if it stays alive. They have 3 maturity rankings within their organization. And their recommendation for everybody is get to what they call IG1, or their first step, before you take any steps towards IG2 or IG3. This is from, it's a little out of date, it's a little over a year old, but the numbers are still relatively close, that if you were at IG1, that first column is the relative percentage that you're protected over these different threat vectors. It's pretty good. And IG1 it's a lot of industry standard kind of best practice things of making sure you have software to protect you. You're using multi-factor authentication, things that if you Google this or if you've been around cybersecurity before, you've probably heard hundreds of times. But it's actually implementing those things in a meaningful way and making sure they're configured appropriately. Now, stepping from IG1 to all of the CIS safeguards, you can see the numbers increased dramatically. That threat vector is decreased incredibly, which is fantastic. Unfortunately, you also notice that none of these are at 100%. Even with the most robust controls configured in a very mature way, there still is room for error. The most common of which is human error. That human point is generally that weak point. That's why business email compromise is that 90+% of what we see volume-wise. We have to get better, even with safeguards in place. We have to all take responsibility with this. Tom, again, said it well. It's not just an IT issue. It's not just a technical issue. There is a human component to all of this, especially in our personal lives. I saw a question come in. Do I think business or zero trust will stifle business innovation? Yes, is the short answer. And there's that balance. There's always that balance between what would be great to do from a security perspective and what you have to do. When my wife leaves the house with the kids, I'd love to have the armed caravan around them wherever they're driving and not have to stop at any stoplights and just get where they're to safely. Unfortunately, my paycheck doesn't look quite that good yet. Can't afford that. And obviously, it's just not reasonable. You have to balance business use case with these security things and try to protect, especially the most critical information, as best you can. A zero trust strategy may stifle business innovation, but if things are still tested right, if you have the appropriate controls in place, you set up things like what we call sandboxes, so safe environments to test those business innovative pieces and then configure them for your production environment. It's an extra step to make sure you're safe, but it's a slow down, not a stop for that business innovation. A great question, by the way. All right, here's the slide everyone will probably screenshot. And again, most of these probably look very familiar to things that you've heard over time and recommendations that are really just best practice at this point. I'm going to start just by highlighting a few of these. I'm not going to talk in great detail because I want to highlight that last bullet of trying to be smarter than these threat actors want us to be. First recommendation, and any framework is going to say the same, multi-factor authentication is #1 and it's not close. I would add to it by saying that if you have any accounts with sensitive information or personal information that you want to protect, don't only put MFA on there, see what type of multi-factor authentication it is. If you're using email or text-based, it's not as secure as you think it is the easy way to say it. If it comes to an app or if it uses any form of biometrics to authenticate you for that approval, those are the better versions of MFA. So even with MFA, they're not all created equal. Try to get one of the more robust ones if at all possible. Password manager is another one. It's a pain to get all your passwords in a password manager. I had to go through the same thing. I convinced my wife, in fact, it's the better way to go. I can say very proudly that I only know 2 of my passwords between work and home. The rest of them, I don't know. I don't want to know. They are all in password managers. I know my password to get into my password manager, and I know one other one that's critical just in case for some reason that service is down. With the password manager, I would also say if any of your passwords from multiple systems are the same, that's a best industry standard no-no. Each system that you have access to should have a unique password to it. And this is where it gets hard, is how the heck do I remember 500 different passwords to everything that I get into and keep it secure? Password Manager is the easiest way to do that. It can help you generate those passwords, keep them safe, let you know if they're compromised. I always recommend Password Manager.
Mike,
A
can I
couple,
actually ask a live question? Because this is
absolutely.
always one that concerns me. Do you ever worry about your password manager getting leaked or that getting some access getting there?
Absolutely. And it has. Keeper, and I see the question in chat as well. Good timely question. Keeper, or no, excuse me, not Keeper, LastPass was one that got compromised and has been compromised multiple times. Compromise is relative when it comes to access to these passwords. And the best part about if the password manager were to be compromised is it's a moment in time compromise of what those credentials used to be. And chances are, if mine were compromised, I'm part of probably thousands of people who were compromised as a result. If there's any word of it being compromised, the first thing I do is I go through and change every password that's in that password manager. And the time it takes me to go through and change those, it is a pain. To me, the relative security around that to keep those individual accounts protected is it far outweighs the risk. I don't have all of my accounts in a password manager. Some of them I have like stored on my phone in a separate sort of password manager. It's not as secure because there's no sensitive information in it. I still need a password to get in. I still have multi-factor set up just because I'm me and I have to have MFA on everything. Uh, but if it's not something that's critical to me, I may not put it in a password manager, especially if I'm sharing it with others. Password managers do make it easy to share, but to me, the security far outweighs the risk in doing that. And no password manager, two password managers are created 100% equal either. Not to pick on LastPass, but they have had repeat issues, and I think they've unfortunately kind of gone the wrong direction over the past couple of years. Keeper is one that we really like. It's what we use here at Patriot, and I'm a big fan of. They've had some risk in the past, but the passwords themselves, if anything has been compromised, it's remained encrypted. It hasn't been something that's actually been openly compromised. And there are some really, really good ones out there. RoboForm's another one that does a really good job. There's a handful of probably 5 or 10 of them that really kind of stand above others. If you're going to go with a password manager, people like me are happy to make recommendations. And honestly, even a quick Google search to say who are the most secure, top-rated password managers. The Google AI results will give you a quick summary, and there will, be good results if you stick to highly reputable sources. In the interest of time, I'm going to go through a couple of these a little bit more quickly. Software updates, make sure all your software is up to date. Any software that's out of date is an immediate threat vector, word of the day, but it could lead to compromise. Try to keep those things updated as much as possible. Only download apps from trusted resources. If you're on MSN looking at news or CNN or whatever, and you see a pop-up, the pop-up is not a trusted resource just because it's on a CNN site. Go to the source of truth, do your own resource and research and diligence to make sure you're going from a trusted site. Where I want to focus though is, again, try to be smarter than these threat actors. So recurring education, training, mock phishing, simulations, tabletops, trying to enable people to understand the threats that are out there and how to identify them is paramount. And we talk about this a lot from an organization perspective. We don't talk about this a lot at home. And in my home, my wife is plainly tired of me talking about it. But I share this with friends and family. I talk with others as really making recommendations for best practices. And some of the top ones are be cautious with public Wi-Fi. If you're on a personal Wi-Fi that you haven't reset the password for your modem or router or your personal equipment, all those passwords should be reset to try to keep yourself at home safe. Protect your personal information as much as you can. Again, multi-factor authentication on any of those accounts is number one. Number two is be careful what you post online. Even if you think it's protected, if anything is posted online, I promise you it can and will be used against you in the eyes of a threat actor. It's difficult to do that. So some things that I do with my family is I have a safe word. I have one with my immediate family. My kids are really young, so they don't really partake yet, but for my wife and I, and when my kids get older, they'll partake as well. I have a separate one for my sister, my nephews, and my parents that we use if in the eyes of something that were to happen. So if my mom were to get a call at 2 in the morning that I've been kidnapped or something crazy, she's going to ask a question that is going to seem completely off the wall to whoever the heck she's talking to. And if they don't answer it correctly, she's going to know to hang up and call me. Safe words are hard. Rotating those safe words, especially if you've had kids that other people have to pick up from school, you probably know the pain of having a child try to remember and then utilize that safe word. It can be tricky. That's what I would always recommend, though. If you have children, or even if for yourselves, I always recommend people freeze their credit. It's the easiest way to protect against identity theft and fraud. It's easy to unfreeze temporarily. My children are 2 and 5. Both of their credits are frozen as well. I've done that on their behalf. Credit monitoring is very reactive. I don't want to know somebody got access to what they shouldn't have. I want to stop them before they get in the door. Again, this is kind of that shift to that zero trust mentality that we're seeing, just in a different sense. Again, I'm going to circle back to this, but social media, please don't post stuff on social media unless you have to, especially if it's sensitive. Obviously, share and have fun with it. Just know that anything that's posted there can be used against you. And if you have any security questions that are tied to your hobbies or pets whose names are on social media, etc., really think twice about going back and choosing different security questions or finding another way to secure those accounts. Again, in the interest of time, I'll talk about the organizational pieces. Your organization, any organization, should be implementing industry standard or better controls. I mentioned this before, but if a tool is in place to protect your email, but it's misconfigured, you're at risk. So it's not just about having the tool, it's about regular audits to make sure that those tools are at or above industry standard. Recurring education, we've talked about a few times. They're a pain, but it's the best thing to do to raise that awareness and visibility. And the last part I'll touch on is having a plan. So if something does go wrong, whether in an organization or at home, have a plan for how to recover. If my identity is stolen and I can't access my credit cards, if I can't get to my social security number to get another credit card, if my bank accounts are frozen, I have a separate account my wife and I have that we don't use for anything, just in case of this. Now, we're a little crazy with it. I don't necessarily advise that for everybody. But if you don't have a plan and something like this happens, the experience is going to be dramatically worse than not. So keeping in a safe, a small list of things with social security cards, numbers, account numbers, who to contact, is always a good idea. And organizationally, having an incident response plan that's tested and used on a regular basis, something that most organizations and cyber coverage carriers require these days. Again, don't just look at this from an organization perspective. Having a plan at home is really critical. At the end of this, I'll just share one last thing, is preparation. This type of webinar, any type of education you can have, helps you prepare in the light of a threat, whether it's through your organization or personally. All the things that we've talked about and much more is available to you to help protect you. I am happy to answer questions as I can for anybody that has it after this call, in addition to any questions we have here in the last few minutes. Or there's lots of nerdy people like me out here who love this stuff. There's really good versions of YouTube content where they show how threat actors operate and how they kind of try to trick threat actors. Many of them are very funny. But it's really compelling. It shows a good story on kind of current trends and how to keep yourself safe. Again, without preparation in this, especially for where we're headed, especially with AI helping with it, it's very, very difficult to stay ahead of it. But that preparation makes the biggest difference. Nikki, Tom, I'll hand it over to you. I know I just left a couple minutes on the clock here, and I see we have one question, but I'll let you kind of fill in, and then we can answer questions if that works for you guys.
Tom, you might be on mute.
My first Zoom. It's overwhelming to sit and listen to all this, and I wrote down a lot of different emotions. I feel frustration, overwhelming, paralyzing, even, right? Like to hear all of this. And I think the key is that you are educating yourself. If you're on this webinar, you know how important this is, and it's take one step and take the next step and try and be incrementally better. As you go through this process, we all need to do it. Again, this is non-optional behavior these days. And we just spent a lot of time on, what's going on in the world, how we can proactively deal with things. And, we're an insurance agency. And, this is one of those scenarios in risk management where insurance is a piece of the entire process. But the proactive nature of what we all need to do, I think, is more important than the insurance itself. That's not to mean that the insurance part of the process isn't important. It is absolutely important. And believe me, in the event of an instance, you want to have an insurance policy in place to help you. You don't ever want to go through this, but if you do, this is one of the unique insurance policies that's out there where you're not just buying, the financial coverage to make you whole after an event. You're renting a team, a proactive team that is going to get involved after a threat, after an attack, that is there to not only deal with the financial consequences of something, but the financial consequences of regulatory compliance that we have at the state and federal level. You're going to bring in, forensic professionals to understand how and why, we had this particular attack, and be able to deconstruct that. You're going to bring in, legal representation. You're going to bring in people that have expertise in handling your reputation on an ongoing basis. Um, it's a very robust insurance policy when you're purchasing cyber insurance, and it is without a doubt a necessary evil these days. Um, it's if there's a call to action here, there's too many calls to action. It is be vigilant, it is be proactive, and it is, to make sure that you understand that having cyber insurance is no longer a nice to have. It's something that you have to have. I know we have one more question. I don't.
Well, let me add one thing to what you said, Tom, and then I'll take the question that was posted. It's not just about the attack; it's the tail after that of everything that happens in that level of coverage. A couple metrics to share. So right now, the last number that I saw, the average time it takes to identify a compromised system across just the United States is 42 days. That's a problem. Some are much better than that, some are much worse than that, but the average being 42 days to identify that somebody's in your system doing something that they shouldn't. The tail after that identification for just ransomware events, the average time to close a ransomware event is somewhere between 18 and 24 months because of all the regulatory compliance, the recovery pieces, the notifications that have to go out, data mining to understand who needs to be disclosed to, and working with those partners to give that level of confidence that, yes, we had an event, here's what happened, here's what we're doing to make it right. Easiest just to stay ahead and avoid all that if at all possible. But you're right, the protection and the extra help to deal with all of those things is becoming more and more critical. To address the question that's in chat, so what is the single biggest challenge businesses face in protecting sensitive data with integrating AI? I think half of the sessions that I go to, if they're webinars or conferences around security and AI, this is paramount. I will start by saying nobody has the perfect answer for this. Everybody has a different opinion. My opinion is a term that I didn't know a couple years ago called data sovereignty. So the biggest part of vulnerability we have when integrating with AI is where that AI is and how it's using our data. Data sovereignty means that my data needs to be sovereign from all other data out there. So my data can't train the large language model, it can't train the AI model, et cetera, because I don't want any hallucination or any type of data getting back to somebody where it shouldn't if it's our internal data that I have a responsibility to protect. I look at it that same way with my personal life. I don't put anything about my kids or sensitive information about me and my family in any AI model at this point, unless I'm 100% confident it is completely sovereign to keep my data 100% safe. Data sovereignty is really tricky when it comes to partnering with third parties because obviously they need access to the data to be able to leverage it for their services. Some have put in really robust controls and protections around this. Some don't take it that seriously yet. What I would always recommend is find me at whatever organization or company you're working with, and make sure that they're really on top of the compliance and evolving regulatory requirements as it relates to AI. ISO has a really positive framework specifically designated to AI that's a sublet of their primary framework. It's in addition to that. If they're not familiar with it, I'd recommend they get familiar with that. That's ISO, ISO. And again, if you can't ensure that data sovereignty piece and you don't know 100% with certainty of how they're going to use your data, it's not safe. I'd always advise not using it.
All right. Well, we're just about out of time here. I do want to thank everybody for joining us today. I want to thank Mike again for sharing his vast knowledge with all of us, as much as you scared the heck out of us. We greatly appreciate it. And kudos to everybody that sat through this presentation, because you recognize how important this is. Thanks for continually keeping us safe, Mike, and taking an hour out of doing that. And if you do have any additional questions for Mike, feel free to reach out to any of us at FBinsure. We're happy to get them to him and facilitate that. And thank you all again. We appreciate your time and we appreciate your business.
Thanks, everybody.
Yes,
Thanks, Tom.
and to answer that final question, I will be making slides. I will be sending out a follow-up email with a recording of today's presentation and the slides so that you'll be able to view them and use them at your leisure. So have a great one, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you all.